all the accusations that were leveled in the direction of Special Counsel Robert Hur yesterday before the House Judiciary Committee hearing, both veiled and not so veiled, of political hackery by the likes of Eric Swalwell and Adam Schiff, technically an officer of the court in Schiff's case. Amazing that he was in the context of his, I get Sisyphean Senate race, but nonetheless, it's worth it.
Just can't see him being a senator. It's not right.
And Cori Bush, just to give you a little flavor of it before we hear from Special Counsel Robert Hur discussing the details of his 350-page report in which he recommended against charging Joe Biden for mishandling of classified information because essentially, while there was inculpatory evidence against him, he didn't believe he could get a jury to convict him, and so this is why he recommended against. But just to give you a sense of what you're dealing with as Democrats run damage control for the contents of this report that put Biden, in his own words, in less than a favorable light when it comes to, I don't know, sapience for sure, sentience even is in doubt. Cori Bush, she's the one with the multi-$100,000 security detail out of St. Louis, newly minted member of the Socialist Spice Girls. We'll see how long she stays. This is how she used a portion of her time yesterday.
That the potential mishandling of classified information is a serious issue, and I believe it was appropriate for the Attorney General to appoint both special counsels in the Biden and Trump cases. As my colleagues have pointed out, President Biden fully complied with the investigation conducted by Special Counsel Hur, who did not find evidence sufficient to warrant criminal charges. Despite this outcome, Republicans have used the special counsel's report to further their longstanding efforts to re-elect the former white supremacist in chief, Donald Trump.
God, shame. I mean,
serious person.
Yeah.
These are serious people.
She started talking. It was like, wah, 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 wah.
Adam Schiff in particular, since he's supposed to be the prosecutorial superstar in that group. He did such a bang-up job during the Russian collusion investigation where he was forever on CNN and MSNBC talking about a forthcoming smoking gun that was never produced. This is his exchange with Robert Hur over, who is essentially playing politics here.
But you chose a general pejorative reference to the president. You understood when you made that decision, didn't you, Mr. Hur, that you would ignite a political firestorm with that language, didn't you?
Congressman, politics played no part whatsoever in my investigative steps.
But you understood nevertheless, didn't you, Mr. Hur? Mr. Hur, you cannot tell me you're so naive as to think your words would not have created a political firestorm. You understood that, didn't you, when you wrote those words, when you decided to include those words, when you decided to go beyond specific references to documents? You understood how they would be manipulated by my colleagues here on the GOP side of the aisle and by President Trump. You understood that, did you not?
Congressman, what I understood is the regulations that govern my conduct as special counsel.
And those regulations
required me to write a confidential report for the Attorney General,
which you knew would not be confidential.
My decision, and that is what I did, Congressman. I followed the rules.
You knew it would not be confidential.
I followed them. Yes, Congressman, what you are suggesting is that I shape, sanitize, omit portions of my reasoning and explanation to the Attorney General for political reasons.
No, I suggest that you not shape your report for political reasons, which is what you did.
That did not happen, Congressman. That did not happen.
Right, and of course he had the exchange with Premier Jayapal too, where he said, "Look, you keep saying exonerated, but this was not an exoneration of Joe Biden." So the question becomes: I mean, you know what the Democrats are doing, and by the way, so if I had said, to Adam Schiff, if I had said Joe Biden is a dizzying intellect, and we were so impressed with what he had to offer, all the explanations were completely cogent and credible. They answered the concerns that we had, and we fully exonerate him. Would that have been political? Would that have been seized upon by one side? Of course, going in as a special counsel, no matter what you do, it's going to be seized on by politicians of both sides. So the idea that that this is, you knew it was going to be released. Well, Merrick Garland had indicated he was going to release at least some portion of it, so everybody knew, and obviously it was going to happen. But I mean, but there's always going to be a self-interested interpretations and assessments of a special counsel's report, just like there was for Mueller. But that wasn't political at all. And there was no concern about politics. And there was no concern about how it would be seized upon by this group or that group to advance their particular point of view. I mean, he's such a disingenuous hack, Adam Schiff. He's just not very good. I mean, I can at least appreciate somebody who is talented at practicing the dark arts of law and arguing things they know not to be true. But Schiff isn't even good at it. I mean, I guess he's good enough to convince California voters, but in any sort of absolute standard, it's pretty feeble, I thought. Anyway, for more on this, let's get a much more impressive legal mind than mine into the conversation, and that would lead us to Professor Richard Epstein, James Parker Hall, Distinguished Service Professor, Emeritus of Law, Senior Lecturer at the University of Chicago. Professor Epstein, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
It's very nice to be here and to listen to you, Ben. I like it.
Yes, thank you. I had to get that off my chest, and I'll turn the floor over to you. But I mean, your assessment of Robert Hur's reasoning, and if you want to get into his testimony to support that reasoning, please do.
Yeah, look, the first thing I want to say is when you listen to Schiff and Cori Bush and everybody else, nobody asked the question of whether it was true or false. All they wanted to know was whether or not this thing has some political implications, and everybody knows that it does. He gave something to everybody in that sense, but I think the most important thing that came out is that Hur was an honest public servant being derided for doing what he was supposed to do. I mean, anybody who watches Joe Biden dodder across the stage and understand that he could barely talk even if he had the teleprompter in front of him, and knows that he's about my age, but he's a hell of a lot more exhausted than I am. And never in my wildest dream would I want to assume a political position that requires you to work 24/7 with the entire fate of the nation resting upon your shoulders. And so what it is just an effort to bully this guy. And Schiff has always been a bully. Everything he's ever said has been wrong with respect to these various explanations. And remember, he was the man, as you pointed out, who made all of these really stirring claims about deep revelations of the corruption in the Trump administration, was never able to back any of them up. And in fact, what happened is, I always ask the following question: who's got the bigger mouth, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Well, it's going to be Donald Trump by a mile. Who's made more illicit indictments? And who's been the victim of more of these things? Well, the Democrats have constantly gone on this warfare. And as best I can tell, Trump has never indicted anybody based upon the kind of political statements that come out of his mouth. And so it's really a very, very odd situation that you hear on the Democratic side and from the American Bar Association, which has become a completely useless organization, that we really are worried about threats to democracy. But they always assume it's the venting of Donald Trump, and they never assume that it's the rather insidious indictments and prosecutions of Joe Biden. And so there's a real disconnect there. If I could give Donald Trump one piece of advice, it would be shut up and don't insult people gratuitously. But I mean, let's put it, those are not capital offenses. On the other hand, bringing false prosecutions against him, as they've done in case after case, against Trump is really, I think, a political scandal, and to sort of have the mantle of being only the defender of the rule of law and the sanctity of democracy is a kind of gross hypocrisy, which is done. I mean, Cori Bush is mindless in everything that she says and she believes. Everybody's a white supremacist because the white supremacist is defined as somebody who disagrees with her. And I would certainly put me in that category, and I dare say would put both you and Amy in that category.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what happens is it's the debasing of language in political debate, which is most discerning on both sides. And it's once you put that in there, people who are not experts in policy find it very hard to get through the policy issues that are behind the debates to figure out who's right and wrong, so that the public discourse suffers by all of these kind of rambunctious outbursts on both sides of the political aisle. We are in a state of polarization worse than I've ever seen. I blame Trump for much of the silliness and the rhetoric, but in terms of the conduct, nobody beats the Democrats for playing the game of warfare, as we now lawfare, LAWFARE, which has become a popular term to explaining how it is that legal doctrines and legal prosecutions have been harnessed for political reasons.
Well, I wanted to ask you, I kept hearing yesterday that, President Biden, he cooperated with authorities. No warrant was needed. He let them search their house. But if you murder somebody and you lead police to the body, that doesn't mean that you didn't commit the murder.
Well, look, the correct way to say it is all that evidence would come in by way of mitigation. It would not come in by way of denial of a particular crime. But if you look at the actus reus, what it is there is what they did is he basically took doctors out knowing that they were protected and they're not supposed to be in his thing, shared them perhaps with people who have no security clearances. That's a wrong. There's a second offense that happens, which is you could kind of conceal this and obstruct justice, which is what Donald Trump may have done in Mar-a-Lago and so forth. But the fact that he didn't commit the second offense doesn't mean that he didn't commit the first offense. And so the question is how you punish all of this stuff. It's a crime. There's no question that he did it. And if he had been some ordinary Joe, somebody not named Hillary Clinton, he would have been really cashiered in a very, very heavy way. And so what it is they're saying our case is different from your case, but they couldn't say is our case is not criminal. All they could say is it's less criminal, maybe, than the other fellows.
Less criminal, right, yeah.
Less criminal. I mean, the idea that both these people are running for president now, the Mar-a-Lago charge is a valid charge, as best I can tell, with respect to violation. But then it's the kind of the equal protection notions that hit you. Hillary Clinton did a hell of a lot worse, and she did it in real time. Donald Trump waived some documents in front of other people, which were probably out of date in any event, whereas she in real time was being probably hacked by everybody in the United States, to be honest, with respect to the rickety server that she built in her own house. And they managed to let her walk. And so that's going to be what the issue is equal justice. People understand the technicalities of mens rea in criminal cases are somewhat difficult. It's perfectly clear, for example, that James Comey didn't understand them when he started to comment on that. It's not a defense to a charge that you take in doctrine to say that you don't know what the law is, and it's incredible on its face. The name is Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or anybody who is in a position of power. So what we have now is kind of watching Rome fiddle as all of these weird statements become the currency of the day, and the very critical issues are what do we do about the Securities Council, Securities and Exchange Commission, the FTC, the EPA, foreign affairs, the size of the military. Nobody can talk about that because we're interested in gossiping. And I think that this is a real tragedy in the United States, and this hearing is an illustration of how far things have gone. Poor Mr. Hur is a faithful public servant as far as I can do, so I give him a round of applause.
Well, I'm impressed with her too. I don't think he's a political hack, and I don't think he's anybody's toady. I think that came across. However, that's not the same thing as agreeing with his ultimate judgment call. And based on what you just said there too, the equal protection considerations, combined with he conceded in this report that Biden's biographer destroyed evidence. And he said, well, he destroyed the recordings, but we had a transcript. Well, as the exchange between him and Gates went, well, he only destroyed some evidence. So is that if you only destroy some evidence, it's not the same obstruction crime if you destroy all the evidence? So one, he probably should have recommended charges against the biographer. And then two, he probably should have recommended charges against the big guy is the judgment call, particularly as you add that equal protection context that includes both Hillary and Trump, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's certainly plausible that it could have done that. The problem that he had, he said, is he thought that this guy was such a doddering fool that he would never be able to get a conviction against him. And so if you actually look at the charge that is given to him, it's not to decide whether or not there's just guilt or innocence. And what you said is pretty correct. He was guilty of serious offense, as was everybody who was working with him with classified information when they didn't have a clearance. But the question of whether or not you can get a conviction is part of the recommendation required to do so. So that's why you got into the second half. I don't think he said he wasn't guilty. He said, I can't get a conviction, which is not quite the same thing. So, I mean, look, it's a very hard call. And remember this, the buck stops not with him; it stops with Merrick Garland. And the question is, would Garland say, "I think this is sufficiently for them to prosecute"? Well, that's a joke because you get Mr. Weiss back again, and you can have a slow road to nothing. I think what he should do is get Jack Smith properly appointed, and then him bring against Biden. I don't know what I would do if I were a prosecutor, but the single most uncharted waters in criminal law is nobody's figured out how to have a rule of law campaign which allows you in a sensible fashion to cabin in prosecutorial discretion. It is the ongoing nightmare. And the basic answer is if you don't have good people, you're going to get bad outcomes. Nobody's been able to figure out a management technique that stops rogue people, particularly at the top. Prosecutorial discretion, you got Alvin Bragg, right, as a role model. Letitia Games is a role model. I mean, did they do anything that's illegal as opposed to something that's just downright stupid? Well, you're not going to be able to get them removed from office on the grounds that they brought these prosecutions. So it's an open wound, and I think Herb was just trying to be honest. And it's a report. It was a confidential report, quote unquote. And if Garland says, you know what, I don't think the excuses really hold. I think my president is not senile, not doddering, not foolish. I'm going to prosecute him. Well, I'm not even sure you can do that. I mean, there's a big debate on both cases, on both sides, as to whether or not you have a sitting president. He can be prosecuted for some particular kind of crime, either in or out of office, if you haven't gone through an impeachment trial first. I mean, it's actually a very, very hard case.
Well, that's the immunity claim that Trump has made that's now in the hands of the Supreme Court. And what's your assessment of where the high court comes down on that?
Well, I think I don't think they're going to accept this because what's happened is everybody below has gone the other way on this. It's a closer case than they allowed. So my guess is that what will happen is the generalized immunity will not apply, particularly he wasn't president, for all the acts that he was charged with. He was certainly president on January 6th for the last 14 days. My guess is there may be a dissent by Justice Thomas, but I would guess the majority of the court would uphold it. The thing that's very much in evidence, however, is nobody's taken seriously the double jeopardy charge. If you recall, at the impeachment trial, which was a criminal trial, they basically tried the insurrection card and they lost. You read the Jack Smith indictment of Trump, and it's Mickey Mouse stuff that they're talking about, all of the edges, defrauding somebody and so forth, and obstruction. These are minor charges, and they're also included in the insurrection charge. Because you have to do something in order to commit insurrection. And if you don't block anything and you don't defraud anybody, and all you do is watch television, that's not an insurrection. So I think, in fact, this is precluded. It's precluded for a second case. Judge Chutkan didn't give it the time of mind, but I thought she was just plain wrong on that particular issue. And what's happened is nobody seems to take it seriously, including the Wall Street Journal, which dismissed this as a one-off sentence. But double jeopardy essentially applies to any second prosecution related to an offense committed by somebody in the same branch of government. So double jeopardy applies. If the military brings an action on somebody, you can't have a single court. If an impeachment does it, it's exactly the same way. Double jeopardy does not protect you against a state prosecution under the law. So then the question is, what's an offense? And if you allow people to give different counts of prosecution ever, so I'm going to prosecute for this or for this or for this, coming out of the same nucleus of event, you could have an infinite number of prosecutions, which is why the correct rule is an offense covers all the legal charges that can be made out of a particular discernible event, i.e. the events of January 6th. So I think that's probably the defense that should win. And of course, I don't know if you're aware of it, but there's a very learned and I think quite powerful argument that Jack Smith was illegally appointed as the prosecutor because he never got the requisite Senate clearances as an officer. That's being argued right now before Judge Eileen Cannon. The two people who print the thing, Steve Calabresi and Gary Lawson, are two of the most eminent scholars in the country on that issue. And Ed Meese lends his weight to it, and he's a former prosecutor. And by the way, I knew him in his prime. He was a very serious man in terms of the way in which he thought about constitutional orders. He wanted to run seminars all the time. I think, in fact, that Smith should be dusted in this particular case, and we'll see what she says.
Interesting. Professor Richard Epstein, James Parker Hall, Distinguished Service Professor, Emeritus of Law, Senior Lecturer at the University of Chicago. Professor Epstein, thank you as always.
Okay, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. And he joined us on our Turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
For armed or unarmed security, average isn't good enough. You deserve more. You need more.
Morrison means more.
Morrison Security. More deterrence and prevention with customized programs that fit your budget. Cost-effective, sensible solutions for all businesses and facilities.
Morrison means